It has now been more than half a month since this war began, and instead of slowing down, the conflict appears to be entering an even more dangerous and unpredictable phase. What initially seemed like a limited confrontation is now evolving into something far more complex, with new developments emerging almost every day. Many analysts now believe the war has entered what could be described as Phase 2, a stage where the consequences are spreading far beyond the battlefield and beginning to affect global energy markets, international shipping routes, and geopolitical alliances around the world. One of the most controversial developments during this phase is the reported American strike on Kharg Island, a location that holds enormous strategic value for Iran. Kharg Island is not just another island in the Persian Gulf. It is one of Iran's most important oil export terminals, a place where massive tankers load crude oil destined for markets across Asia and beyond. Because of its importance, any attack there instantly raises global concerns about energy prices and economic stability. According to reports, the United States carried out major airstrikes despite warnings from Iran that attacks on its economic infrastructure could trigger retaliation across the Gulf region. At the same time, the rhetoric coming from Washington has been strikingly contradictory. On one side, Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that the United States is winning the conflict and that Iran's military capabilities have been severely weakened. Yet on the other side, the same administration has been calling for support from allies, urging countries like Britain, France, and other major powers to assist in stabilizing the region and securing shipping routes. This contrast between confident declarations of victory and calls for international assistance has raised serious questions about what the real situation looks like behind the scenes. One of the biggest strategic concerns emerging from this conflict is the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important maritime choke points on the planet. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply travels through this narrow waterway every single day, meaning any disruption there can send shockwaves through global markets almost instantly. Reports now suggest that Iran is attempting to exert greater control over the passage of ships through the strait, creating a scenario where commercial vessels may face new risks or restrictions depending on their national affiliation. This possibility has alarmed policymakers in Washington because controlling or reopening such a vital waterway is far more complicated than launching airstrikes. Even the world's most powerful military cannot easily solve a prolonged disruption in such a narrow and strategically sensitive corridor. This is why discussions are now focusing heavily on international cooperation, with calls for allied navies to escort commercial vessels and help guarantee freedom of navigation in the region. Meanwhile, other global powers are watching the situation very closely. China, for example, depends heavily on energy supplies moving through the Persian Gulf and is carefully evaluating how the conflict could reshape regional trade routes and alliances. Diplomatic conversations between Iran and several countries have also intensified, as each side attempts to secure economic advantages while the crisis continues. Beyond the economic dimension, the war is also spreading into multiple regional arenas. There have been reports of militia groups targeting American interests in Iraq, including attacks near diplomatic facilities in Baghdad. Such incidents highlight how quickly tensions can spread across borders, drawing additional actors into the conflict and increasing the risk of escalation. Military analysts have also pointed out logistical challenges facing the United States, particularly when it comes to sustaining large-scale air operations. Modern air campaigns depend heavily on support systems such as aerial refueling aircraft and surveillance platforms. If those support systems are disrupted or destroyed, maintaining air dominance becomes significantly more difficult. At the same time, the Israeli front has added another layer of complexity to the situation. Missile exchanges and the use of different types of munitions have intensified debates about escalation and the humanitarian impact of modern warfare. Discussions about weapons such as cluster munitions have raised serious concerns about civilian safety and the difficulty of preventing casualties once such weapons are deployed. These developments demonstrate a broader reality of modern conflicts. Once the level of escalation rises beyond a certain point, controlling the consequences becomes extremely difficult. Political leaders on all sides face immense pressure, and the risk of miscalculation grows rapidly. Adding to the uncertainty is the flood of rumors and misinformation spreading across social media. Claims about the deaths or injuries of major political figures appear online almost daily without verification, demonstrating how quickly speculation can dominate public discourse during wartime. In such an environment, distinguishing fact from rumor becomes extremely challenging for ordinary viewers and readers. At the same time, political rhetoric continues to intensify. Iran has reportedly set tough conditions for any ceasefire negotiations, including demands for major concessions, while American leadership continues to emphasize strength and victory in its public messaging. These contrasting narratives reveal the complex balance between diplomacy, military strategy, and domestic politics during times of war. Governments often project strength publicly, even while quietly exploring diplomatic options behind closed doors. Another major concern now being discussed is the possibility that additional regional actors could become involved in the conflict. Armed groups in Yemen, Lebanon, and other parts of the Middle East could potentially enter the war, dramatically expanding its geographic scope. Strategic waterways such as the Bab el-Mandeb Strait could become pressure points as well, raising fears that two of the world's most important maritime chokepoints might face disruption at the same time. If that scenario unfolds, the consequences for global trade could be severe, potentially pushing oil prices sharply upward and disrupting shipping routes between Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Meanwhile, missile defense systems in the region are being tested repeatedly as waves of drones and rockets strain their capacity. These systems rely on a constant supply of interceptors, advanced radar coverage, and logistical support, and prolonged conflict gradually weakens their effectiveness. Smaller armed groups across the region are carefully observing these dynamics, waiting for opportunities to exploit any vulnerabilities that appear. The broader geopolitical implications of the conflict are becoming clearer with each passing day. Some Gulf countries are quietly reassessing their security partnerships and exploring whether alternative alliances might better protect their interests in an increasingly unstable environment. At the same time, the long-standing strategic relationship between the United States and several Gulf states is being tested by the pressures of this war. Despite all these uncertainties, one thing is clear. The conflict has created an escalation ladder where neither side appears ready to step back easily. Iran views the confrontation as a matter of national resistance and survival, while the United States faces its own political and strategic pressures not to appear weak. As a result, both sides continue exchanging threats and military actions, even as the economic consequences begin to affect the broader world. Energy markets remain nervous, global supply chains are under pressure, and governments across the globe are watching closely for signs of either escalation or de-escalation. Some analysts have even begun discussing extreme scenarios involving nuclear escalation, although most experts believe such an outcome would be catastrophic and therefore unlikely. Still, the fact that such conversations are taking place shows just how tense the situation has become. Ultimately, the coming weeks may prove decisive in determining whether this conflict continues to spiral upward or whether diplomacy can still prevent a much larger regional war. What is certain is that the stakes extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. The Persian Gulf sits at the heart of the global energy system, and instability there has the potential to affect economies and societies around the entire world. For now, the international community is watching carefully, waiting to see whether cooler heads will prevail or whether the next phase of this war will push the region even closer to a far greater crisis.